My aunt announced at my cousin's wedding that I'd never find a husband because I was too busy playing businesswoman. She had no idea I owned the venue we were standing in. My Aunt Patricia has never been what you'd call subtle. Growing up, she was the relative who commented on everyone's weight at Thanksgiving, asked divorced cousins invasive questions about what went wrong, and somehow always managed to make her observations sound like concern instead of cruelty. I'd spent most of my adult life keeping a polite, careful distance from her, the kind of distance you maintain with a relative you can't avoid but also can't quite trust. I worked in event and hospitality management, which, to Patricia, sounded like a nice way of saying I planned parties for a living. She never asked follow-up questions. She never asked what hospitality management actually meant, or how a person builds an actual portfolio in that industry, or what it takes to go from coordinating other people's weddings at 24 to acquiring your first commercial venue property at 31. She simply decided, early on, that I was the fun one who never got serious about anything, including, in her mind, my own future. The comment that changed everything happened at my cousin Vanessa's wedding, an event held at a beautifully restored historic estate about 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of venue with soaring ceilings, manicured gardens, and a waiting list that stretched almost 2 years out. Patricia, fueled by 2 glasses of champagne and her usual disregard for context, cornered me near the dessert table during the reception and said, loudly enough for at least 6 other relatives to hear, "You know, at some point you have to stop playing businesswoman and actually settle down. Nobody wants to marry a woman who's married to her career instead." I smiled, the way I always did with Patricia, and said something forgettable about being happy for Vanessa. What I didn't say, because there was simply no natural way to say it at someone else's wedding reception, was that 4 months earlier, after nearly 2 years of careful negotiation, I had become the majority owner of the very estate we were standing in. It hadn't been part of some grand plan to embarrass my family. The estate had come up for sale after its previous owners, an elderly couple who'd run it as a boutique event venue for almost 20 years, decided to retire. I'd been searching for exactly this kind of property for over a year, something with history, character, and an existing reputation strong enough to build on rather than create from scratch. When I toured it the first time, months before Vanessa even announced her engagement there, I knew immediately it was the one. I closed on the property in early spring. Vanessa, coincidentally, had booked her wedding at the estate almost a year earlier, under its previous ownership, long before my deal even began. By the time her wedding day arrived, the transition of ownership had been quiet and largely invisible to guests, handled entirely through the existing management team I'd retained specifically so operations would continue seamlessly for events already booked, including my own cousin's wedding. I made a deliberate choice not to tell anyone in my family about the acquisition before the wedding. Partly out of respect for Vanessa, whose day it was, and partly, if I'm honest, because some quiet part of me wanted to see exactly how my family would talk about me when they still believed I owned nothing worth mentioning. Patricia's comment at the dessert table wasn't even the worst moment of the night. Later, during her toast, she made a joke, the kind she clearly thought was charming, about how she hoped Vanessa's new husband appreciated a woman who actually prioritized her marriage over some career fantasy, unlike certain other people in this family. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. Half the reception looked at me, some sympathetically, some with the awkward amusement people have when they're relieved the comment isn't aimed at them. I left that wedding without saying anything, the same restrained silence I'd practiced with Patricia for over a decade. But something in me had shifted, quietly and permanently, sometime between the dessert table and her toast. 3 weeks later, the venue's management team reached out to Vanessa directly, as they did with all past clients, offering a complimentary 1-year anniversary photo session at the estate as part of a new client appreciation program the property was rolling out under new ownership. Vanessa mentioned it excitedly at a family dinner, delighted by the gesture, wondering aloud who the new owners were and whether they might be willing to do more events like that in the future. I told her the truth, calmly, the same way I'd been honest about everything else in my life that my family had simply never bothered to ask about. I told her I was the new owner, and that the anniversary session had been my idea specifically because it was her wedding day. I wanted to make sure stayed special regardless of what had been said about me in the room that night. The table went quiet in that particular way tables go quiet when a joke someone made months earlier suddenly stops being a joke. Patricia, to her credit or perhaps simply because she had no other option, asked if I was serious. I confirmed it gently without a hint of triumph in my voice because triumph had never actually been the point. She didn't apologize at that dinner. People like Patricia rarely offer immediate apologies. Their pride requires processing time first. But 2 months later at a smaller family gathering, she asked me, almost carefully, about the hospitality thing, genuinely curious for what I believe was the first time in over a decade about what I actually did for a living. I told her. She listened, actually listened, in a way she never had before. Vanessa and her husband ended up hosting their first anniversary celebration at the estate, exactly as promised, surrounded by family, including Patricia, who spent most of that evening quieter than I'd ever seen her at a family event. I don't think Patricia will ever fully become a different person. Some patterns run too deep for that, but she stopped making comments about my career fantasy entirely, and once, in passing, she introduced me to a family friend as my niece, who owns some of the most beautiful event venues in the state, a description so far from playing businesswoman that I had to fight to keep a straight face. I think about that wedding sometimes, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet clarity about what it actually means to be underestimated by people who've decided, long before they know you, exactly who you're allowed to become. Patricia spent years assuming my ambition was a phase, a distraction from what she considered a woman's real priorities. She never once asked me what I was actually building, because she'd already decided the answer didn't matter. If you've ever had a relative decide who you are before bothering to ask, decide your ambition is a phase, your career a hobby, your independence a problem waiting to be solved by marriage, remember this, you don't need to correct that story out loud, in the moment, at their volume. Sometimes the truth simply needs enough time and enough quiet building to correct itself, at exactly the moment it matters most. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Silent Empire. New story every week, subscribe so you never miss one. See you in the next one.